Glass cannon, a term used to describe a character in a video game as having a high offense but an extremely low defense. You can get this so-called glass cannon term into Pilgrimmed in the form of the build system. Items like the Patchwork, Lyre, and Sanguine Ring are usually incorporated into these glass cannon builds. Well, mostly Sanguine Ring because despite Lyre and Patchwork giving negative defense points, usually a ton, it's usually the standard for, making decently high DPS builds nowadays. Like, sure, you have Viking armor, but, no one really uses Viking armor. They just rather just go with Lyre or Patchwork because, defense down isn't really much of a, it's a stat. But anyways, the Sanguine Ring. You are forced to use the Vexation skill with it most of the time, unless you don't want to, which is fair enough, but usually people like to pair Vexation with Sanguine Ring, which halves your health bar, and to even use the Sanguine Ring's effect, you're going to have to take lots of damage, which scales between 50% of your HP all the way down to 0%, and and the buffs you'll get from it, which is 50% extra movement speed, and I think swing speed as well as 50% extra damage, will scale in between that. This glass cannon archetype is always welcome to the community, in my opinion, but one thing this game doesn't really have a lot of are glass cannon weapons. Like, we have our builds and accessories, but no really weapons. But that's where the Coffinhilt comes in. The Coffinhilt is a fun little glass cannon weapon that you can obtain from either coffin raiding or getting the extremely low chance of 10% from one of the hardest non-boss enemies in the game, the McCreep. I wouldn't say extremely low, but it's pretty low for an enemy like that. But anyways, I don't usually talk about enemies too much in these videos because they are usually not very interesting or they're extremely easy to deal with, like the Marauders and Sandpods. But the McCreep enemies are a whole different breed. They are undead enemies that take the appearance of coffins when disguised. Once you get near one of the disguised McCreeps, it'll grow limbs and attack you with either a unparryable grab or a slow but parryable slam. These enemies are usually very hard to kill due to the small environments you fight them in, causing you to not see very well when fighting them, or having a chance to run into enemies like the Twig enemies, or, Venom. Also, make sure you fight them head on, because if you try to cheese them with long-range weaponry, it'll just deal significantly less damage. Okay, back to the Coffinhilt. This weapon might just be one of the most unique weapons in the game right now. Well, maybe melee weapons in the game right now. This weapon's main gimmick is that each swing summons a very long purple blade that deals some damage to you, if you hit it or not, and applies the Cursed Flames debuff that deals 5 damage twice a second, and ignores defense and damage reduction. This Cursed Fire also has a side effect. If you apply the Cursed Fire to one enemy or more, which also includes bosses, it'll be able to activate the Coffinhilt's Heavy, where on activation, it'll do a quick burst of damage replenishing some health. On the other hand though, if you use the Heavy with no enemies having the Cursed debuff, your Heavy will do nothing and eat some of your HP. This weapon already seems pretty cool, but there's still some stats to uncover. So let's talk about those stats. The Coffinhilt is an undead weapon that has a base damage of 18, a base damage of 6, 35% extra piercing, and then surprisingly 50% more end lag. The stats itself are pretty interesting, like, low damage due to the scaling with the purple blade, because, they both can hit the blade itself and the purple blade. Anyways, pretty good range for what, it is a dagger. Pretty good range. I think it has more range than the scrap longsword, surprisingly. Alright then, now on to the trivia / facts section of the video for the Coffinhilt. The Coffinhilt is one of the only weapons in the game that has a unique effect limited to it. This effect is the Curse debuff, as explained earlier. This debuff can only be afflicted in any way, shape, or form with this weapon, the Coffinhilt, or the Coffinhilt's firearm brother, the Coffin Lock. Also, did you know that the Coffinhilt on release for Catacombs, which was on September 2nd, 2023. This weapon had some of the lowest drop chances for an item in the game. Both the Coffinhilt and the Coffin Lock had the drop chances around the 0.3% and 0.2% ranges on release. That's actually fucking mental, man. Also, last thing, I'll still fight for my life to say that this weapon is a dagger weapon, even though its quote-unquote classification of dagger kind of got stripped away along with its compatibility with the rogue. If you don't know what the Rogue is, it's a chestplate you can get from the Kennet NPC in the Savannah biome, or specifically at Stonehenge for the fucking, I think that was called, but yeah, Stone Surgeon, yeah, Stone Surgeon. It's an armor piece that allows you to get guaranteed peak crits for the heavy, only when you use 6 hits on a dagger. So yeah, it kind of got that. It's a compatibility with the Rogue kind of got taken away, but I'm still calling it a dagger because look at it, it is a dagger. Alright, now on to the builds. As always, we'll be having a non-crit and crit build. And, you know, the non-crit build I actually made for this is honestly, I actually like this. I use Blood Gem and Prism Crown to have maximum sustainability when tanking for Fearmonger. It's honestly worth the gem and helmet slot because the weapon itself is so, it's actually nuts. And with the extra damage and piercing from the corroded scalpel buffs. Next, we have the crit build. This is probably the best you can get in an elemental crit build for this weapon. You're probably wondering why I didn't go the classic Fire Gem Slime Mob build for the crit build, but after some math and, you know, testing the build itself, this build is actually, you know, it's basically better than it is at its fullest. But if you want to play a little more carefully, then I guess the Fire Gem variant might be your pick. Alright, now onto the bosses. Since this weapon is like late endgame, I'll be testing it on the tankiest endgame bosses, which will be Old Fart and Kata, as always. By the way, I didn't get the audio for these clips, so you're going to have to bear with me for it. Don't skip though, because the clips are still worth watching because of how short they are, and it shows how OP the builds are. Anyways, back to the testing. Okay, starting with a non-crit build on Kata, I really like how the Bloodthirst and Prism Crown can make tanking with Fearmonger with this weapon much easier. Fearmonger with Coffinhilt literally shreds anything. Also, I meant Blood Gem. Lastly, we have the crit build on Old Fart. The footage explains itself. Anyways, final thoughts. I think the Coffinhilt is a really fun weapon. I wouldn't say it's a fully balanced weapon by any means, but the glassiness of the weapon, due to the health down per hit and very weird timings on the heavy, mixed with the 50% less end lag, keeps its damage in check. I really do hate how you get this weapon in every single fucking way, but you know what? I guess you have to suffer in order to get this demon of a weapon. Anyways, I'm going to have fellow Coffinhilt enthusiast, Vord, voice the ratings.
Getting this weapon sucks. 4 out of 10, as 3NDY would say. I mean, seriously, if you tried to get this thing between the big coffin room nerfs and the drop rate changes, it was probably the worst thing to do in Pilgrimmed at the time. Me creeps are already difficult enough to fight, especially in the most common area, which is the jail. It's cramped. You can't see. It sucks. I need a light. Someone help me.
Oh, that's the jailer.
The weapon itself is pretty rad. 8 out of 10, as our good 3D would say. The gimmick of setting shit on fire with a ghost sword, then hitting the R button is pretty rad. However, you gotta do it at the correct time. Otherwise, you kinda just... Also, for a dagger, it has end lag, I guess, and crazy piercing, and the added benefit of hitting twice if you're real up close with the weapon itself. Kinda like the Shoomerang. It's also an undead element. Also, I guess it's a broken dagger. I see it more as a sword, but whatever. As previously mentioned, the gimmick is, I said, pretty rad. It rewards being risky by basically fully healing you and dealing a crapload of damage to whatever you're fighting. As the ND would say, it's 10 out of 10, or even a 12 out of 10, I guess. And also, as previously mentioned, very cool how it's 2 weapons at once, the Ghost Blade that sets things on fire, and the tiny broken hilt of the actual weapon, which can both deal damage and increase DPS if you're really trying to get the most worth out of this weapon. The Heavy is very interesting too, since it records your risky play by healing you for the damage you've taken, even more so if you're using the Blood Gem, and even more so if you're using the Prism Crown as well. And it does a very fair trade-off of damage and health. It kind of reminds me of Sephragos from Arcane Odyssey. But yeah, this weapon's pretty rad. One of the best ones on this channel, with my Vorthosband seal of approval.
Anyways, thanks to Vord for voicing that last segment. Pretty cool guy, eh? Also, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. And with that, we'll see you fellers next time. Goodbye.